Record. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining in today's discussion. I am the chair, and this panel.
Oh, and I'm sorry, Jack is going to be joining us here in just a few minutes. He just walked in and setting up.
Excellent. Okay. Excellent. Wonderful. I am the chair for this panel presentation. The title for this presentation is Persistence to Resilience, panel discussion concerning the future of international public debate, IPDA in the virtual debating community. The sponsor will be in the Argumentation and Forensics Division. Today's presenters will be Dr. Jack Rogers from the University of Central Missouri, Keith Peterson from Colorado Northwestern Community College, Jay Bourne from the University of the Cumberlands, and Jacob Humphreys from the University of Alabama. Research and discussions about the current challenges faced by the IPDA Debates Association has led to increased attention at recent conferences at the National Communication Association, NCA, Pi Kappa Delta, and at the National Developmental Conference on Individual Events. This panel discussion stresses the need to examine the problems, solutions, and suggestions in the virtual IPDA debate community relating to speed and jargon, time constraints, regional diversity, resolution architecture, and collection of evidence and virtual tournament practices. While there's been much discussion about in-person tournaments, there has not been much scholarly discussion about the future of IPDA debate in the virtual realm. So therefore, this panel will spark a much needed conversation for debate scholars to determine what steps are needed to resolve the unique problems within our debate community. And it will also hopefully provide a framework for future qualitative research and future discussions at additional conferences. Up first, I believe we have Jacob Humphreys from the University of Alabama. He is a graduate student, graduate teaching assistant, and coach for the Alabama Forensic Council. He coaches IPDA debate for the debaters within the team. And he, if I'm not mistaken, he is joining us directly from IPDA Nationals tournament at the Abilene Christian University in Abilene, Texas. So right now, I'm going to allocate 10 minutes per speaker. So Jacob, whenever you're ready, I'm giving you the first 10 minutes to you.
Well, thank you, Randy, and thank you to all of our distinguished guests here on today's panel. I do get the privilege of speaking first, and I have a debate round in 20 minutes, so I get to warm up at the same time. So double benefits there. But anyways, again, thank you, Randy, for having me for this really important discussion about where IPDA is going to go in the future now that we have the introduction of virtual debate a few years ago. We all started down this long path, and unfortunately, and hopefully, it's not over yet. Like what I'll kind of be talking about today is the good, the bad, and the ugly of virtual debate. And I think that I would be remiss if we didn't start off with the good things, because there has been a lot of good things that I've seen in my time with Jefferson State Community College and the University of Alabama. There's been a lot of awesome things happening. So a few of the really good benefits that we've seen from virtual debate, especially with my time at Jeff State here, we've been able to kind of diversify our competition space. So what I mean by that is we've been able to be more, we've become more aware over the past few years of like different regions and how they feel about certain parts that maybe we feel differently about. So in our region, we were taught a very purist form of IPDA that, you know, Jack Rogers, Mary, and Jay, and every panelist helped build. So we're very purist. And so we were kind of able to come on to one of the benefits of virtual debate was we were able to be open to new discussions and new things that are happening across all different regions. So, you know, recently over the past few years, we've gone to tournaments where there hasn't been like disclosure like, disclosing like your scope of the debate, essentially. And that's been good for us because, like, I think so often in debate and like speech in general, it's easy to get into your own echo chamber. So getting to see a lot of these new ideas and things that we're not used to, it only not only makes us a better team, but it's also very educational for our debaters. So developing those strategies has completely changed since we turn into the virtual realm. Also, we've also been able to go to a lot more tournaments because of not having to pay for uh, you know travel concerns like hotel rooms, so on and so forth, that come along with traveling. So I've kind of got two different perspectives. My time at Jeff State, who I'm here with now, um, it's helped them out a lot because we've been able to compete more, but it's also been the case for the University of Alabama because we've been able to kind of expand into the IPDA realm away from individual events, not away from individual events, but we've been able to complement each other very well because of these virtual spaces. So it's been very inclusive for a big school like the University of Alabama, but also a big or a smaller school like Jefferson State Community College. So that's kind of like the good things that we've seen in terms of virtual debate. Now, some of the bad and like ugly things that are bound to happen whenever you have a virtual environment. Um, obviously there's the worry of like ethics in debate and making sure that a competitor isn't Googling something mid-round is always a major concern. But thankfully that hasn't happened, or at least to our knowledge. So that's always a bad thing. The next thing is like IPDA has this thing where like there's a pro debaters where anybody can step in that's loosely affiliated with a college. They don't have to necessarily be a student there. They can much more easily debate in these virtual settings, which is fun. Debating pro today, I have nothing wrong with the division, but it also like sets up this scenario where colleges who have been doing this activity a long time and who have these huge alumni bases where they have experienced debaters. Says my internet connection is unstable. I hope people can still hear me. But these huge alumni bases can like come in and boost up a team's pro division, which helps them towards individual sweeps. They don't have to necessarily pay for that division to travel. So like my time with Jeff State, we've specifically seen like this influx. I have the hard data on this, but that's like a worry that we've always had, that like teams can just insert their pro division. And since Jeff State is like a newer team, we don't necessarily have that alumni base set up. So again, that's kind of like one of the disadvantages of like the virtual realm. That's kind of like a thing where if you have a lot of people that have graduated, moved on to other spaces, they can come back, which is great in different ways. But it can also be bad for new teams. So whenever we're having this discussion, we kind of have to analyze all of it and decide whether or not this is the path forward that we want to take, and have these general discussion points. But I think that the IPDA would be disadvantaged if it didn't take more advantage. But we also realize that a lot of teams are in different spaces right now. They're in different places in terms of where they can travel, how often they can travel. The University of Alabama was fortunate.
Jacob, before you continue, you're breaking up.
That we can travel as much as we want to. Okay. How have I just been breaking up the whole time?
Yeah, for the past 20 seconds, it's been in and out.
Okay, let me try to move closer to the door over here and I'll finish up over there. Okay.
Hmm. You cut out completely.
Good.
No, we can't hear you. Oh my, I think we lost him. Um, and yes, and if also, this is for everyone, if my connection goes out, if it's difficult to see me, please let me know. There you are.
Are you able to hear me now?
Oh, perfectly.
Okay, all right. So sorry about that. I don't know how much you missed or not, but I was just basically saying that I hope that we continue to refine this virtual world that we've brought ourselves into and continue to make it our own because what we have here is truly special. And I hope we continue to make it better. So, yeah, against debate norms, I'm going to leave some time on the clock. So, thank you all for having me. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Jacob. Thank you for your comments, especially on the debate community. And if you're able to stick around, great. But I know that you have a competition round to get to, so if you got to hop off, by all means, you're free to do so. Absolutely, great. Thank you for that. Our next speaker, Jack. Thanks for joining us. Uh, how I know that you are also joining us from IPDA Nats as well. How's it going? How's it going for you? You're muted.
It's going great.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Great, great. Well, by all means, if you'd like to be our next speaker, by all means, right next, yeah, so we have Dr. Jack Rogers, who just joined us. He's the professor of communication studies and director of forensics at the University of Central Missouri. He is also the co-founder of IPDA Debate. So not only he's a IPDA scholar, you have extensive knowledge about the debate community, and I'm sure that your insight will provide uh, much needed, how do we say, commentary as to where the direction of the IPDA debate community should be headed following 2 years of virtual competition.
Thanks. I think that Alan Serlin, Dr. Serlin, and I always, of course, when we imagined IPDA debate, we didn't have the opportunity to do virtual types of competition. Although Alan did, I guess in 98, 99, and probably Georgie can remember this, did do an email type of online debate. And it worked very well. So that was, I guess, our only dabble into using the great virtual unknown. But we always essentially thought that debate is at its very heart, an interpersonal activity. It's about that face-to-face communication, that interpersonal communication. And I think having competed now for a couple of years and coached teams that are doing the virtual debate, there are some good things to say about that, but it has created, I think, a sense of a loss of direction and purpose for some organizations as they wrestle with how do we get back to quote unquote normal, and do we really want to go back to normal? There seems to be, at least in the NFA, there seems to be a fairly large group that wants to continue with virtual competitions, because it does allow those teams that don't have a lot of resources to participate more. It allows for a larger reach into other regions where they can get different kinds of competition, see different kinds of competition before they get to nationals. And then, there's some good things about it, but I can't speak for other teams. I can only speak for my own and some of the teams I've talked to. Man, it is tough to get kids enthused about one more weekend in the same old college classrooms they take class in to do this. It's very hard to do. And they're very easily distracted. I think that we just need to continue. The thing that makes IPDA unique is the fact that we have a very unique structure for how we are set up to perpetuate through a self-perpetuating board to make sure that the original ideals, the original founding concepts are continually reinforced. That we don't get a huge influx of joiners from outside the organization who eventually outnumber the original group and just, basically vote to change it into something that it wasn't intended to be. And so I think we've survived better than many other organizations. We seem to have kept here at Nationals talking to sitting in as a guest at the EC Board of Governors meeting and sitting in the tab room and talking to various members. It seems like we've kept true to our vision a lot better than many of the organizations that I'm also a member of. And so I think we'll weather the storm a little bit better. We may, they talked a little bit, and I hope Georgie can always tell me to mute myself. She has no problem doing that, never did. They talked this morning about maybe putting in the future parts of having some virtual tournaments along with face-to-face tournaments for those teams that have small budgets, that find it difficult to travel, to keep them involved with the organization with the eventual goal of when things do grow and there are tournament opportunities locally for them, they don't have this huge learning curve to get involved. And then, maybe the structure of the national tournament, if it gets any larger, the idea of having to go to an additional day can be quite daunting. And so kicking around ideas about maybe putting part of the national tournament, like maybe the team portion of it virtually a couple of weekends before, and then taking the points and the awards and working that into the face-to-face tournament. So I think we've learned a lot from the virtual experience. I didn't hear strong advocacy anywhere this weekend so far for people who are adamant that staying virtual is the way to go. I think people have recognized the good points and want to preserve what we've learned. But I think, the way for us to move forward is just to get back as quickly as we can to normalcy, to face-to-face tournaments, keeping in mind what we've learned. So, I'm very much, I think, excited about the future. I think things are going well. I think we've got good people leading the organization. And I think we're going to come out of this okay. I really do. I don't think I have seen other forms of debate suffer to a certain extent virtually because formats have changed a little bit. It's a little harder to enforce some of the structure and the rules that they have, but I haven't really seen that in terms of the IPDA. So I think we've weathered the storm. And I think, again, to sum up, that's because of the structure that we have and the leadership that we have that allows us to preserve things through these kinds of challenges that we faced over the last couple of years.
Thank you so much. You brought up a bunch of, I don't know about anyone else, but you definitely brought up a bunch of good points that I definitely would love to touch upon on later. Like I wrote down some questions that I would
Mhm.
love that. I would love to ask you. Um, um, maybe I might ask just a question right now, and then I'll hold off my questions to the end after Jay speaks. But you said that other debate formats have suffered. What other debate formats do you have you witnessed that suffered from going virtual?
I probably the one that I had the most experience, the two would be parliamentary debate. It's a little bit harder to keep time and prep time and flex time, and it's harder to conduct, I think, a parley round if you have technical difficulties and you've got three people in three different areas plus team members. They flirted with the idea initially that your team, they couldn't be in the same room, which made, of course, whispering, back and forth almost impossible. And I think LD, to a certain extent, has also it's a little harder to control. There was some allegations made that people were arguing on one laptop and using another laptop that was connected to the internet at the same time during the round, and that was very hard to control. And so there are just some things that are hard to work out technologically and hard to control when you're not in a live space, when you don't have a judge that can observe everything and say, hey, don't do that. Or we're all on the same clock. I've got the time. You've got 2 minutes left or whatever. And so they found it a little bit more difficult, I think, just because of format issues.
That's wonderful. I have additional questions, but I'll get back to
Okay.
you after Jay speaks. Our next presenter today, is the associate professor and director of debate from the University of the Cumberlands, Jay Bourne. He's been in the IPA debate community for a long time, debate coach, and in my opinion, a distinguished IPDA scholar. Jay, we're thrilled to have you join us. I normally give 10 minutes of allotted time to speakers, but since we have two panelists that are not present, you're free to go over that 10-minute limit. So go ahead, you have the floor.
I won't go too long because if we have a time for discussion, I think that could be good
Sure.
also. The other issue, to piggyback off of what Jack was mentioning, I think handling questions in MPDA is a lot harder than in the dedicated time with IPDA also. Just like you're saying, the logistics of that coming out and around is I think, more of a challenge. Yeah, so glad to talk. Definitely not as long in IPDA as Mary and Jack and several others. The reason we got into it was because of how hospitable everybody was in the community. Webb kept inviting us to Union for a couple of years, and we finally tried it. And like many, once we tried it, we were kind of hooked. And so I think that's a good advantage of IPDA. And I think an advantage of the virtual tournaments, in that when people are trying them out, they tend to like it. And we're getting I think some smaller programs where IPDA might not be as prevalent as other areas, we're seeing more programs get involved and try it and realize they enjoy the format also. So a couple of advantages of virtual, a couple of maybe challenges, and then a couple of things to think about for the future is kind of where I'm headed. Obviously, the ability to compete out of region. We're situated in Kentucky, which is fortunate for us, which means we can go to the South and go to the Northeast and other areas easier than a lot of other programs. And we've been able to enjoy that when we were only doing in-person tournaments also. I think, again, the ability for programs to experiment and try IPDA when maybe it's a lower cost entry to give that a shot. Or if just a handful of students are interested at a program, they might be more likely to enter them to be able to do that. I don't know if I don't know how I feel about it one way or the other, but the Northeast model where you're doing 4 prelim rounds and typically a Pyro Pi 2-out round procedure does match nicely with a one-day IE tournament. And I do think there's some growth in some areas there from that convenience. That doesn't mean, but I like the variety we have. I mean, if I'm going to travel somewhere and drive a day, I think I typically would like to either do a swing or compete in more than 4 rounds. So I think there's a good reason that a lot of people do what they do with that. Obviously, cost effectiveness. I found that most of our online tournaments have been single flighted, which is a convenience compared to double flighting in terms of time and judging and issues like that. And for us in particular, we've had a lot more alumni involvement. So they would be much more likely to maybe even help prep out some of our students in our team workspace or to judge for us when they might not live near where we are or have the time to be away for a whole weekend, but they're definitely available to come from, from Florida or wherever they are, be able to log in and judge for us for the weekend. So we've had a lot of reconnections with our alumni. For us, some of the challenges are definitely there's been a hit on our team size and recruitment. We don't have scholarships. Obviously, there's a convenience of not having to travel, et cetera, but they are just not, my experiences are just not as enthused doing it online as in person. I agree with a lot of Jack said, the rooms get old, you're stuck there for all day, and it feels, sometimes I think the stake, even though you're competing at a tournament, the stakes just don't seem as high. I think you kind of get yourself worked up when you're ready and you're at a tournament in a different location and things like that. So that's one thing. Another issue I think is tournament admins. So it's great that we can outsource some of this, like people are volunteering to run tournaments that aren't even in that location, which you can do with virtual tournaments. But the pool of total people that can run it, either the connections aren't there as much networking at a local level that I'm seeing, or the people just aren't, there's some older people like me that are more than glad to do it in-house, but are a little hesitant to do it online. And I think the tendency, we never knew how long this was going to last. And so I think if you look at the tournament calendar, there probably aren't as many total tournaments available as there had been in some other years, because if I might feel fine to run a small local tournament, but I might not feel equipped to run a large, potentially online tournament or the things involved with that. So in our state of Kentucky, particularly the first year and a half, we just had less available tournaments because people that had run things before just didn't feel like they wanted to run it. And maybe they didn't know who to call to ask to run it. It just feels like the calendar doesn't look as big as it used to be. And that could be a reason. It could be lots of stuff, who knows? And I don't want to hypothesize on that. But, we used to host a tournament every other year, and we just didn't do it this year because I didn't want to have to. I was a little hesitant on some of those details with that. And then I would also, so that was one issue. I would say the last one.
Jay, it appears that your audio cut out. Your audio, we can't hear you.
Hear me? Or is that you're agreeing with that?
Now we can.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. I was just saying, I like the collegiality that we had with IPDA when we're in person. LSU Shreveport would let us prep with them for the topic if we're on the same side. And there's a lot of working across teams. That's harder to do online. We can get a workspace for our team, but you don't necessarily have as much of that. I guess you'd call it peer learning. It feels like it's more of a bubble. And I don't have any idea about what to do with that, but that's a feature we appreciated a lot about IPDA in the past. We were at PICAP Nationals a couple weeks ago, and it's always possible people are trying IPDA that haven't before and that maybe had done other types of debate events. But first or second round, the competitor against our team had a laptop open and was reading evidence from it in the round. And I'm not sure if that evidence was preloaded or was being looked at and searched during the round. And I don't hardly ever do that, but I did tell the tournament director about it because to me that's one of the a fundamental issue of IPDA. And they said since the judge didn't notice it, they couldn't confirm it, but they would notify the other debaters about it and that wasn't okay. And I was fine with that. So I do think with IPDA not necessarily as prevalent in high school as some other debate formats, people do have a learning curve. We need to be able to make sure people are aware of that. And I don't know if that was being done online earlier or not, but you definitely noticed it when we met in person with that too. There are obviously some different regional differences with disclosure, how you use evidence. Often when we're in places that aren't like what I would call historic IPDA areas, they just always want to use their phones for timers. It's very hard to get away from some of the rules of which have a reason for them of IPDA that I don't know that some other places always view them as serious as traditional IPDA does. I think they just think, are you okay with that? I'm okay. I just want to go with that sometimes. That's not at a tournament level. It's more like at a round to round level. And I would just say the last big difference, I don't know if this is unique to online tournaments or not, but just seeing what I call a lot more resolutional tightness, that a lot of topics lately seem to be a much more tight with the idea that you can't use canned cases or to get more toward using that 30 minutes, at least from my perception, closer to extemp topics than maybe some of the traditional debate topics we would sometimes have had in the past. I see much less metaphor use sometimes in topics at some of the tournaments we've been at. The one thing I would focus in, I think, a little bit is judges. IPDA historically has prided itself on having a large lay judge presence, and the importance of that. Virtual doesn't always lend itself to that. That registering them through the online, and sometimes when I'm registering for another tournament, I'm like, these guys are already in the system, so I'll just put them in if they're available. And using alumni is great, but if they've done IPDA a lot, there's a potential there to create a more experienced clientele that could lead to some of the issues that we've seen with other debate formats, where if the judge percentage becomes much and more experienced and used to jargon or things like that, that it could just lead the road to that a little bit. So I think there might need to be an effort, if possible, by tournament administrators to vary that judge pool a bit, work with that. It's a lot easier when you're on campus to ask a professor to judge a round or two. It might be harder to set that up online potentially, but I do think that's one of the real benefits of IPDA, and it can be potentially a little more difficult online with people that might not be used to the virtual formats or the software or the registration or all those things involved too. The other big thing we found, at least in our experience, several of our tournaments we've had when we've gone virtual, it's hard to have a lot of observation of the judges themselves. It's very common in a lot of our rounds for the judge to take off video once the round starts. and you just don't even see the judge at all. And so it's very difficult for competitors to know if an argument is working or not, to try to read that judge, to know what's happening. And it can almost, if you're in a situation where video quality is, internet quality is poor, and maybe even the other competitor goes off video, you just kind of feel like you're speaking in a vacuum. And it's hard. We teach our team a lot about watching nonverbals and looking at how people respond and audience adaptation. And it's just hard to adapt if you don't know how they're reacting. To be fair, sometimes judges are just famously stone-faced and don't give a lot anyway in terms of reaction. But you can usually follow the pen or pencil and see if it's writing it down or not, things like that. So that might be an issue too. And obviously IPDA can't do anything about bandwidth across the United States, but there might be something in terms of like tournament practices, in terms of what's recommended if possible, or things like that. That might be an option too. So a future thing, there's I think there's a future for. I don't think it's an either or. I think it can be a both and, with a virtual and in person. And I think virtual could be a great way to experiment with some ideas if people wanted to. I know Jack had talked in the past about doing IPDA tournament without research of the internet at all, that you would just be talking more off the top of your head or with other people. You could do a tournament that's all metaphors if you wanted to, or themed. There might be an opportunity to try some things, or to offer some things you might not meet at a typical tournament. As long as you're upfront about it, people know what's expected, I think that would be fine. There's a potential, if you're single flighting a lot like we've experienced, to maybe, if you can handle it the right way, maybe offer a critique time or something. You don't want it to get into a part where the judge is hammering on the debaters. We always want to support our debaters, but they're, at the beginning of the year, potentially, maybe you have a designated novice tournament or something, or this is a learning experience where you have a time after the prelims or after the round, after ballots are turned in, where they could offer suggestions for improvement or something, more than go through nitpicking every part about the round itself. But there might be a possible to have more judge interaction in a way that could be potentially helpful. I know that those can cut both ways at that. And finally, I would just say, I think the main thing I would be concerned about is some of the judge impacts, the ability to see the judge, and the potential for the judge pool to become to not be as lay as we might prefer, and how to work with that maybe long term. Last one is, we could just play like MAFL and other organizations and try midday tournaments, short ones, 3 and 4 rounds, instead of just weekend tournaments. So I think there's a both and. I think it's been good for our alumni. For our team itself, it's hard to get enthused as much about that. Since we don't have scholarships, travel is something they really enjoy. And they like being able to meet other students and have conversations with them outside of rounds and stuff. And that's part of the IPDA spirit, I think, too. I definitely think there's a place for both. There's always wrinkles you're working out with it. Frankly, I've been impressed with how quickly we adapted to be able to doing this. We competed for a few years before COVID with some of the Climb the Mountain virtual debates that Jim Hansen was doing. And so we tried a few of those IPDA ones, and there was some technology then, but I've been really impressed in IEs and debate, generally speaking, how well people dealt with kind of the hand we were dealt in the card game, at least for that time period. But anything can always be improved, and I'd be interested in, I think it will evolve in the future too, and I'd be interested to see how that happens. But we love IPDA and like it, and it's to anything, there's advantages and disadvantages, and we were still learning a lot about that. That's it.
Well, thank you very much, Jay, for your very thoughtful comments and analysis of the state of our IPDA debate community and what are some paths we ought to take forward. Since two of our panelists are not present, since two of our panelists are absent, we can definitely open up the floor to questions. I know that, I mean, I know I have, I know I wrote some questions down. And Mary, you're more than welcome to chime in and ask questions of your own as well.
I wouldn't mind just a few seconds to add some basic comments off of everything that I've heard so far.
Go ahead. Sure.
First and foremost, all three of your commentaries, very much to my own heart, very much to the growth of the organization. These comments are much appreciated. The overall concept of this Zoom meeting and this panel is about the future of IPDA. And I wanted to kind of address some of that because I'm the practical end of the executive committee. I am the tournament director. And you know what? It's part of my job to get as many schools involved as possible, at least in the national tournament. And I do see, and I completely agree with Jay, that at the end of the day, when we look at face-to-face communication and mediated communication, both have yins and yangs, both have benefits and disadvantages. And I happen to agree with both Jack and Jay that we need to work to where there is a melding of both of these types of communication, at least for experience. I teach video production. I teach public speaking. When the internet came on, you can't teach public speaking on, computer. Well, excuse me, but within a few months, it was made very clear to me that if we introduce our students to mediated communication and we develop their skills of offering proper nonverbal, for instance, you raise your hand so that they can be seen in the screen, little bitty things that will enhance the computer enhanced or assisted communication. These kind of skills are part of some of the things we need to be doing as debate coaches and teachers. Make them more ready for mediated communication, because guess what? When they get to be, leaders in their own field, they're going to have to communicate effectively via Zoom. And it's with us now. It's not going away. It is too darned easy, widespread, and inclusive for us to think for 1 second that we should live in a world of one or the other. We have to live in a world of both. The idea that IPDA could start, like Jack mentioned, that the executive committee and the governing board of IPDA are indeed looking at expanding our competitive realities, both in the virtual world and in the face-to-face, I think is a very positive direction for not just our organization, but a lot of organizations. To answer a couple of specific things, I'm going to put on my tournament director hat, and I'm going to tell you that the future of IPDA, I'm also an advertising professor, we need marketing, okay? There are a lot of things about IPDA that a lot of the other organizations just do not know or understand. Or, and this is the worst case scenario, and there is plenty of this still out there, there are negative organizational stereotypes in the other organizations about who we are and what we are. I've been at way too many meetings where people in parliamentary debates, evidence-driven seated debate, they actually think we're some kind of watered down second grade version of a debate round. And I don't think that 30 minutes to prep on a significant topic about whether or not the United States should recognize Somalia is a very accurate, support of that kind of an attitude. So we have to market ourselves, and we have to start claiming what are our advantages, which we've been kind of shy about doing. We're so busy trying to grow that we're not getting the message out properly about how much we have grown and how we have addressed specific stereotypical issues. For instance, when Jacob mentioned the pro division, and big schools with alumni base can overflood pro. Well, we've kind of addressed that in our national season-long and tournament sweepstakes. We have a separate award that completely discounts the professional division. So we are trying to, level that playing field. We started off with only the open division, which is now pro. We have added 4 more divisions so that smaller schools and less experienced schools can take their 3 divisions of competitors and put that against the big schools that are running pro. And I'm going to tell you that in the national tournament, the pro division is growing, but the other 3 divisions far outweigh, and there is no way that one school is getting an advantage with running just the pro ranks. The other thing is that the topics that, yes, we started off very much like Parley did, how many angels can dance on the head of the pin. We now have specific categories that we are building into. There should be a policy, there should be a value, there should be a fact, there should be pop culture or sports, and then you get to the esoteric or quotation. So that kind of acceptance of standards, if you will, are now being placed into what is a best practices statement for tournament directors so that they can understand, we've had these problems, let's get past it, and this is how we answered it. And if you would try this in your tournaments, then you're going to level the playing field and everybody will be a little bit better off. Research in rounds, I know that's a big problem with the virtual world. You never can tell. I mean, you could have your email open up right now on a Zoom meeting. I'm still looking at the camera. You'd never know it. But people do know intonation and the vocal qualities of reading versus contemplative and persuasive speaking. We just bring our students up to speed on how to perceive that, and then we can start questioning what are their practices in the round. And the other thing is that as we develop all of these awarenesses and what we have learned as an organization, we need to be out there promoting ourselves, letting people know that we are evolving, we are open to new ideas, and we will start trying to not necessarily change as an organization, but we're willing to compromise and find best practices that will suit incoming organizations. Now, the one thing that we do still hold true to, and that is the reliance on lay judges. Now, that does not mean untrained judges, even though I think the founder would have loved to have them. Jack, you remember Alan Serlin of A Perfect Judging Panel is go out into the hallway and grab the custodial staff and adjunct teachers in for each round, and that they've never seen a debate. But guess what? We get criticized so much in the real world for this practice. But I keep telling people, lawyers don't get to educate their 12 jury members that sit down in a courtroom. They don't have a big discussion afterward about whose idea was better. You present your persuasive ideas, and these people come to a vote. And I think we can do a much better job of promoting the strength of our communication-focused mission, rather than, oh, I'm just going to bring in some judges that already know my jargon and know my contentions, and I'm going to be able to shorthand my verbiage all the way through, because IPDA at the end of the day is a real world communication skill building organization. And we need to make those skills available, and we have to make other organizations realize that there is benefits to our approach, just as there are benefits to their approach. I mean, good night. CETA trains people how to research so beautifully and so extensively and so in depth, but we have advantages too. And we should not diss what CETA is doing the same way that I would request that another organization not diss the way we're looking at the world and how we're training students. I think there's room in the world for everybody. So those are my comments.
Thank you so much for your comments. you mentioned that we need marketing and that we ought to do outreach. What are some strategies that maybe teams or tournament directors or IPDA scholars like ourselves can do to really upsell the merits of IPDA debate?
Well, Randy, I'm going to compliment you because you're the start of this panels like this that can be recorded and then shared with the scholars of other organizations is going to be one of the key elements of getting the word out. We have also tried outreach to high schools. Some are more accepting than others. We actually had a high school division for a while. We've had discussion about reaching out to historically Black colleges and trying to get them to experiment with IPDA debate. And most of the outreach, I think, is going to be through self-examination, surveys, research about where we stand as an organization, and then spreading the word academically to other debate coaches. And we're not going to advocate that they give up their programs. We're simply going to ask that they experiment with IPDA and see if a DOF would want to focus not just on one format of debate and IEs, but maybe two formats of debate and some IEs. So the idea that the all-inclusive word forensics has room in it for more than just one format of debate should be part of our strategy. The other part of the strategy would also be that it's incumbent upon the governing board and the executive committee to reach out to schools that we haven't seen, to reach out to schools that, we all get those notices that these schools have had their funding cut, these schools have lost their DOF. And those are the times when we should reach out and offer assistance and at least an information flow to help fill in kind of a void of leadership while these people are finding new DOFs. So many of our schools have lost their DOFs and turned into student-run organizations. And we could reach out to these student-run organizations so that they get validity, and with that validity and their winning ways, then they can go to their administrations and start petitioning for a replacement for their DOF position. So it's a long road to hoe here, but I think that with a group effort and academically based arguments and rationales, we can make those marketing steps and move forward.
Very interesting. Thank you for that. Yeah, I have more things for you, but Jay or Jack, do you have anything to add to that?
I thought Mary handled it well. For us, with some of these online tournaments, we've done some featured debates online. We did a debate with I Debate Rwanda last spring, and we have another one coming up in the fall. And I think there's the IPDA format, because I think it works better online than some other debate formats. It is a way to get visibility for your program. We got a couple of news articles out of it and people that watch the recording on YouTube. So not only for competitors, I think, do they like it when they try it, but I definitely think at like an administrative level, I think they would respond better to. We had several administrators watch this online debate, and they responded very positively because it's real world debate. It didn't have a lot of jargon and abbreviations and hyperspeed. And so I think it helps to reaffirm administrative support and potentially, visibility on campus. So for that was an interesting thing. We've even thought about, approaching some other maybe foreign universities or other ones and trying to make that part of a regular basis, that we might do one or two a year and just have something that's a little unique or different. I mean, there's great debate locally and everything too. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that at all, but just that things that could kind of gain attention. And for us, that worked out pretty well. And was something we could use, put a splash on our team page or things like that. We could use it too.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Jack, if you have anything to add.
No, I think both of them handled, the ins and outs. And I think Mary is right, that, Alan and I fought the first 10 years, a real uphill battle with traditional, quote unquote, programs for legitimacy. And I think it's an uphill battle that has not been won yet. But anytime, CETA, because I was around right now, CETA was made fun of by NDT. Oh, well, you guys, you only carry a couple hundred cards and you only have a few briefs. I mean, it's not real debate. You're not doing anything in depth. It's all this value stuff. And of course, then CETA met the enemy and they are us. And then they made fun of Parley, because Parley was just, that's not real debate. You're just getting in there and whatever comes to mind, that's what you're arguing. And then of course now Parley has met the enemy and they are us. And so, people will always argue. And I think if we can remember the basic philosophy that Alan and I sort of started the whole conversation with is we don't want to create an organization that teaches you to be a better debater or to be better at playing the game. We want to use debate as a vehicle to teach you to be a better person, to be a better attorney, to be a better teacher, to be a better businesswoman. And debate is a tool to be used. It's not an end unto itself. And I think that when you get to the hyper competitive forms of debate, we teach students to be better and better at playing the game of seated debate or playing the game, and David Berube, in game theory. And that's what they're focused on. They don't necessarily, I think, realize how debate can be used to teach skills that student can then use the rest of their lives. They're focused on the here and the now and winning the championship today and justifying their program. At least that's what Alan and I thought at the time. And we just wanted to teach more effectively. We wanted to use debate to teach our students to be better people and to make real change within their own communities. And I think that's, if we could get directors of forensics to realize that's our mission, that's our heart. I think there are a lot of DOFs out there who are in education because that's their heart. And if they hear that message and they hear it consistently, not only from the organization, but from other coaches and DOFs within IPDA, I think we can win them over. They'll say, wow, I can get back to the education. I can get back to what got me into this in the first place and really feel like I'm teaching instead of chasing hardware, and we just got to get that word out to them. And I'm not an advertising person. That's Georgie, but maybe videos, maybe, I don't know. How do we get that message out? Because Alan and I always believed if you could get people to try it, they would either love it or hate it. And 95% of those who would try it loved it. And the other 5% were like, I don't know that it's for us, but I can see what you're talking about. I can understand why you like it. I just don't know if we're ready to make that switch. And then years later, lo and behold, here they are, right? We just got to get them to try it. Try it, you'll like it. That was a commercial. I don't remember. Try it, you'll like it, I don't know, maybe Mary, we could get a video of her. Try it, you'll like it. I don't know. It worked for Wendy's and Where's the Beef, right?
Where's the beef? It's probably
Yeah.
before my time.
Yeah, well, most things that I refer to are before most people's time. I'm old.
Wow, that's wonderful. So Jack, one of the points that you made earlier in your discussion is that you mentioned that there was an email type of debate early in the formation of IPDA debate. How was that like? Email type of debate?
It was really kind of cool. David and I, Alan and I set it up like a chess match. There was a clock, and you would get the topic, and the affirmative had, so much time to get their argument put together, and it had to fall within a certain word count. And then you hit send to the person that was the negative. And then once they received it, their clock started, and they had so much time to sit there and type out their response. And this went back and forth in the typical IPDA format. And then once it was all completed, it was all sent to a judge. And a judge would read through both sides, and then they had so much time to formulate an RFD, a reason for decision. And it was really kind of cool to be able to read something, sit down in your office, think about it, and outline and do a little research, throw in a little research. And it worked really well. We even had a lot of international people that got involved in it. Now that made the clock a little difficult when somebody's 12 hours ahead of you. It kind of, you would get their stuff at 3 a.m. and you had like 6 hours to respond. So, but it was fun. But ultimately the thing that didn't go well, and I guess killed it, is the same thing that I think, Jay and Georgie are talking about. It loses something in the interpersonal exchange, the reading of human communication, the facial expressions, the tone of voice. But it did teach a skill about written rhetoric and writing persuasive appeals. We just, after a while, just lost interest. We tried a lot of weird things in the beginning that some panned out and some didn't. But
Jack, I remember judging on one of those rounds.
Yeah.
And on the basis of that,
There's
then
a lot
because
of
I had,
feedback.
a new television
Sorry to
studio,
interrupt.
the internet
Well,
connection back in the 1990s.
One of you need
We
to.
started, remember
each other.
going on the practice rounds with you guys?
Yeah.
We would do practice rounds. You were still back at Southern back then, weren't you? Maybe. But
yeah.
the idea here was is that, LSUS has been trying various forms of communication for debate for decades. And the same challenges exist, but I think that as an organizational community, we're coming up with some dynamic answers and some dynamic compromises to facilitate both types of communication, oral and virtual.
Well, and I think it's important that we continue to develop as communication scholars the idea of mediated communication, because our students are going to be in a world where the Zoom meeting is so much cheaper for the organization. You can still get work done, that they need to be able to understand how to communicate effectively as we're doing now. One of the things we haven't talked about is, one of the downsides is, I do the Montgomery Cup, where I take students to the UK, have for 23 years, to travel around the United Kingdom and debate against the universities over there. Well, the CFO of our university, we were talking about the Montgomery Cup and study abroad, and I saved it by making it a study abroad. And she was like, well, why couldn't you just do it virtually? Why travel to the UK and spend all that money if we could just, beam them in and we could do it here? And it's like, well, we could do that, but then the kids don't get the benefit of the travel. They don't get the cultural stuff. There's no excitement of, I'm going to Europe, and some schools have said now the administration is looking at their budget and saying, let's see, 2 years ago you were traveling and it cost us this much. Then you quit traveling and it costs us this much. So that's one of the downsides of being overly dependent on this form of communication. And a lot of people that are quitting business right now, one of their big complaints is they don't like Zoom meetings. They enjoyed the travel. They enjoyed the interaction with colleagues from other cities, getting together around a table and talking it through rather than this form of communication. So it's not peculiar to us. But I definitely think you're right. I think we need to continue to teach our students and continue to innovate and continue to experiment.
Yeah. And you make a great point about the cultural exchange. There's absolutely no difference between seeing a British debate team and a USA debate team on Zoom, except for the accents. But to walk into that building that is 500 years old and passing suits of armor and understanding all of the cultural differences is an enriching experience. And quite frankly, it's an enriching experience for Northerners to come down south and vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The idea of building collegiality, as Jay mentioned, and networking skills that are available at tournaments, not just the 5 minutes where I'm giving this speech, but all the rest of the day we're interacting
in the prep rooms and
interacting program with program instead of individual to individual in just the competition. That's the real strength.
Well, and I think part of the problem is that administrations have financial burdens and they get hooked into the utilitarian aspect of what we do. They don't understand what I call the liberal arts view of things, the human view of things. They just, what's the utility? Right? How can we make this more cost effective, more time effective, and still have them come away with the same skills? And so I always sit down with the board and people like that, and I say, well, what skills do you want them to come away with? Do you want them to be able to conduct a meeting on Zoom, or do you want them to be able to be persuasive in a boardroom with you? Which is more valuable? Well, they can't learn. I can't Zoom them into your board meeting and have them be persuasive. You want to see them, touch them, and interact with them. So we have to keep pushing what we are, which is a liberal arts education, and the human factor. We just have to keep pushing that.
Thank you so much for your comments, both of you. One of my final questions before we wrap up for Jack, is there any kind of literature about these email types of debates on maybe somewhere in the NFJ, National Forensic Journal, or the IPDA journal? Because I'm asking because I would definitely would love to add this into my research, especially in my literature review.
You might, I will have to look for you and send me an email to remind me. There was a forum in the Southern Journal of Forensics about David Berube wrote an article that was not in the Southern Journal, but it was like debating in space, and he was talking about email tournaments. And then we had a forum, I think it was in the Southern Journal of Forensics, which is out of publication now, but I still have old copies of it, where part of the forum was talking about email tournaments. That was in the 90s, I want to say.
I think it was the late 90s.
The late 90s, when that was put into the journals. But I can look for you. If you send me an email, I'll be glad to go through the old journals to see if I've got copies. And if I do, I'll scan it and send it to you. Because like I say, the journal is out of print. It was the Southern Journal of Forensics, and then it became the International Journal of Forensics. And then it became Controversia, a journal of democratic debate and renewal. And then that ceased publication, I want to say in 2010, I think. But yeah, there's some articles out there somewhere on it.
Absolutely, because I'm doing my research. I'm sure all and I actually have your book, which is
Oh
Transforming
yeah,
Debate.
yeah. Yeah, and it's with the book, and one of the things that it would probably not be very cost effective, but the textbook that IPDA puts out, okay, would be a wonderful way to get the word out on the organization. If we would purchase, say, 5 or a dozen copies of the textbook, and when we saw at tournaments other DOFs who were not IPDA involved, and we said, hey, George, I think I got something you might like. I want you to take this book. It's just take it. It's for you, right? You teach debate, give it a look through, give it a perusal, see what you think. Because a lot of the philosophy of IPDA and the way we do things is encapsulated in that book. And you may get, some DOFs to read it and think, hey, this is not a bad thing, right? So that may be another way to get the word out to other DOFs about what we do and why we do it. I don't
Sure,
know. Just a thought when you held up the book I edited.
absolutely. So
Yeah.
I'm going to end the recording now. And that takes us to 12:45 or 1:45 Eastern time. So that actually takes us right at time. Thank you for our discussion today. I'm going to end this discussion. This concludes our discussion panel on IPDA debate.